how to discuss the Bible in a way that works. I'm gonna challenge you in that this might, like, I don't know why you came tonight. I don't know if it's like, just give me the words to say, and when someone says Bible and I don't know what I'm supposed to say, like, just tell me what I'm supposed to say. This is not that. This rather is how to get you thinking both about the Bible, but also like how to engage with people in conversations about the Bible. And it's, I hope maybe a shift in your mindset. So the goal is not to prove that you're right and anyone who disagrees with you is wrong. We already know that's true. You already know that's true. You're already good at that. You're already good at making sure that everyone knows you're right and they're not. This is not that. This is not about like winning a fight, an argument. I'm right and you guys aren't, and so you need to listen to me. If you have been to any number of these in the last, I don't know however many months, you'll remember this, that our goal is, listen, this sounds so weird, I get it. Our goal is not that they, by the end of our conversation, that they say, I agree with you, you're right, I'm wrong. If that happens, hey, awesome. There's maybe times where you're so convincing that in one conversation, they recognize and realize that, wow, you really are a brilliant genius. Now, for those conversations that don't go that route, here's the goal. Ready? The goal is to keep them up at night. The goal is to discuss like the topic in such a way where they're going, man, I haven't thought about that before, or wow, that was you really challenged me on this, and it challenged how I think about this thing, or man, it's got me questioning maybe things I've always believed to be true. And in that moment, all right, awesome, we've had a good conversation, and we're like iron sharpen iron, so to speak. And it isn't like I'm right, you need to agree, or else. Rather it's, hey, let me just share where I'm at, you share where you're at, and we'll challenge each other. We'll discuss things that maybe we disagree about, and then when you walk away, go, man, all right, that was a good conversation, and it's such an enjoyable that you say, I would like to do that again, and they say, I would like to do that again. I'm not going to have you raise your hand, but I'm also going to guess you've had a number of conversations with people in which the end result is, well, we'll never talk about that ever again, because it didn't go well. Like, you could have said all the things you wanted to say, but the tone or the atmosphere, or like the expectation that someone has to give, someone has to win, someone has to lose, it's such a bad taste in your mouth that you're like, I don't want to do that again. I don't want to get yelled at or debated, and I don't want to create a fight. I want Thanksgiving to go well next year, so we're not doing that again. And so, right? So the goal then, even as we talk about the Bible, which can be a very divisive topic, is not to say, I'm right, you're wrong, and I need you to agree with me, or else. The goal is to speak in such a way where they go, huh, that makes sense. Or, I've never thought about it that way before. That's interesting. When I talk with people, whether they're Christians or non-Christians, or kind of new to faith, or checking things out, or just questioning, wherever they are, my goal is this, that by the end of either our initial conversation or a number of conversations, that even if they don't agree with like what we talk about when we talk about God or Jesus or the Bible, they at least go, but I can see how it's at least reasonable. At least is reasonable. There's at least one person I know who I would say is not a dummy, me, hopefully they're saying that, and he believes this, and he makes some good points. All right, I'm not convinced maybe, but at least I understand why or how someone could believe that. That is a huge win. That is a great conversation to have. So, okay, here we go. You got your notes? Raise your hand if you do not have notes. Any tables do not have notes? Awesome, look at that, perfect. Okay, if you don't have a pen, there should be one maybe on the chair next to you, or maybe there's the chair you're in on the back of it, and if there's not, just steal your neighbor's. Okay, so here we go, ready? Three key strategies when discussing the Bible. We're going to go through three of them. We're going to do some specific examples, but we're going to talk in generalities, and then we'll kind of look at how it works. This first one, I admit, is controversial, and you're probably going to wince a little, but that's good. That's good. The goal isn't that you're like, wow, I'm right, I'm wrong, and Brandon's right. Though, that's a good goal, I would say. The goal is that you go, oh, all right, it got me thinking. Okay. Don't argue inerrancy with non-believers. Wait a minute. All right. Some of you are writing that down, and your first question is, what's inerrancy? I don't even know if I agree with that or not. Inerrancy is this, the doctrine that the Bible, as originally written, was without error or mistake. That there aren't errors or mistakes in the Bible, written down. Not in our English translation, but in the actual documents that were written, that God directed and guided the people who wrote down the various books of the Bible in such a way that it is without error. It's as God intended, and there are no, like, the human error element. All right, that's when we say inerrancy. Okay, now, I'm not going to put you on the spot and say, like, raise your hand if you believe this, but as a Bible-believing, Jesus-following, like, Christian, I strongly believe in inerrancy. Strongly. I will not bring it up to a non-Christian. It's not me denying it. Listen, I've had many conversations with friends who are Christians who are a little kind of not, maybe a little loose on this, and we get into like really good conversations about it. It's great. When I'm talking with a non-Christian, I do not fight for this. Do you know why? No, that's why you're here. All right. Because it adds a hurdle, a speed bump, an unnecessary block in the conversation. So let's talk about this, okay? Here's the claim. The Bible is written by men and is full of contradictions and errors. Anyone ever heard that before, or some variation of that where people will say, well, the Bible's full of contradictions, or it was written by men, and how can it possibly be perfect? How can it be the word of God when men wrote it down, and clearly men make mistakes? So how can you trust that there are no errors in the Bible? All right, great question, okay? That's usually the issue that people bring up. Okay, first, here's the strategy. Ready? Focus on reliability over inerrancy. Now, do I raise your hand? Just agree. True or false? Brandon agrees with inerrancy. True or false? Good. I heard trues, and then one lone wolf said false. Please escort them out of the. Okay, true. This isn't because I don't believe in inerrancy. I certainly do. But the conversation is not about inerrancy. The conversation now is about reliability. So the early Christians, think about this. The early Christians didn't have an intact New Testament to point to as inerrant, but still relied on historical events, the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. Everyone you read about, everyone you know about in the Bible didn't know or have a complete New Testament. They didn't have the conversations about inerrancy. It was just simply, well, we know what happened. There was no fighting or arguing about inerrancy because they didn't have the Bible, like that wasn't even complete yet. So the very first Christians didn't have these they didn't have these fights about inerrancy. Instead of proving divine inspiration, here's the goal. Ready? Argue that the Gospels are historically reliable. This is different. This is the goal. This should be your goal. This is my goal when I talk with people. Let's place the New Testament with the same amount of standards that we do any other document of antiquity, meaning from like like thousands of years ago. All right. Any other documents we have in world history. Okay. How do we critique those? All right. Let's do the same with the New Testament. Instead of saying there's a different standard, we say, all right, let's just point to the fact that they are historically reliable. Christianity, we can say this, stands or falls on facts of history about Jesus. Everything rises and falls in our faith on Jesus. If If the Gospels are not historically accurate, meaning they're legends or they were made up or they were written, hundreds of years later about when no one was alive to see this guy Jesus, that is a big problem for us. If that's true, that's a big problem for us. If we can instead point to the fact that, no, they were written early on, and they were written during the lives of people who were alive to see Jesus, and they are historically reliable and accurate compared to like how we gauge or assess any historical document, then all of a sudden we have something to look at and say, whoa, wait a minute. We can't so easily dismiss this. Typical conversation could go like this. Your friend says the Bible's full of contradictions. Your response, hey, if that were true, which I'm not conceding, I'm not saying it is, but devil's advocate, let's just for the sake of argument say, all right, it has some errors in it. Okay, why would that matter? Why would that matter? They say, it proves it's not the word of God. This is their response. It proves that if it has any errors, it proves that this is not the word of God, right? At this point, they're going like, checkmate, I got him. But you're smarter than that, hopefully. And you know how to respond. All right. But that's not what I'm arguing, because you're not arguing that there is without errors. A book doesn't have to be divinely inspired to be historically accurate, right? The New Testament can be, this is why there are Christians who I am not one of these, okay? Let me clarify. Who will not hold to inerrancy, yet will still look at the Gospels as historical, reliable documents for their faith, even though they'll say, maybe they weren't perfect. Because the issue is not perfect or not perfect. The comparison then is, all right, but are they accurate to what actually happened? Because our faith rises and falls, ready for this? Not on your view of the Bible. It rises and falls on the work of Jesus on the cross. Did that happen or not? Did this happen? Was that a historical event or not? If the answer is yes, then that means something. So what we're looking for is it historically accurate. I will grant someone to say it has errors or that, copying mistakes, so be it. All right. But does that change the fact that Jesus died on the cross and rose again? Does that negate now the death and resurrection of Jesus? So you say this is your response. Do you have any books in your library that you think tell you things that are accurate about the world? All right. Here's the argument. Ready? Does a book have to be perfect to be accurate? Usually the argument goes like this. Well, men wrote it, so they have errors. So of course it can't. Of course there are errors. All right. I don't know if you know this. Well, this is true up until about 2 years ago. Every book ever written in history was written by a person. Did you know that? Until ChatGPT, until AI came. Now all of a sudden it's computer generated, but it still has an author. It's still programmed to, like somebody wrote it. All right. By that argument then, you can't trust a single book or textbook or history book you've ever read because a man wrote this or a woman. A person wrote this. It could clearly have errors. Therefore, you can't trust any physics book, any math book, any science book. You can't trust anything because a person wrote it. Hold on. There are plenty of books and documents that we would say, no, this is true. Even though so simply saying that someone wrote it, therefore it must have errors, well, then we can't have any exchange of ideas ever in written form. Are any of these books that everyone will say like, yeah, there's various history books or science textbooks or certainly math textbooks where like, yeah, this is true, right? Just because a person typed this out, this is true. All right, are those divinely inspired? Do they have to be divinely inspired to be reliable and accurate? Of course the answer is no. Of course the answer is no. When you were in school, you knew this to be true. You had your textbooks and you carried them around, which by the way, kids don't have to do that anymore. Did you know that? It's probably why they're so weak. I'm just kidding. Do you remember that? I remember another, okay, tangent. I remember being in college and being like, there's no digital textbooks. And if every class you have is like 4 books and you're carrying around, all right, I have 6 classes times 4. I have 20 books. Like, how am I? It's like I'm carrying a body. Anyways, none of them are divinely inspired. Yet, they can teach us something and are accurate and are certainly helpful in our pursuit of truth and are growing in our understanding. So, focus on reliability over inerrancy. This shifts the discussion from inerrancy, a theological claim, to historical credibility, an evidence-based claim. Is the New Testament reliable? Are they credible? From the eyewitnesses who wrote about them? Yes, all right. That opens up a world, a whole new world then. We can say this: don't waste time arguing with a non-believer that the Bible is God's inerrant word. Now, do I believe that? Again, remember? True or false? Brandon believes in inerrancy. It's true. I'm not gonna ask if you do. Some may, some might not. I don't wanna start a fight right now, but listen, you don't have to, you can believe in inerrancy, which I hope you do, and also say, but I don't need to fight over it. I don't need to win this argument for someone to become a Christian. Instead, we say this: we talk with Christians about inerrancy. My conversations about inerrancy are with other Christians who are maybe thinking or second guessing or debating about inerrancy. But the goal is sidestep that with a non-Christian, because you're adding a hurdle that they don't need. You're putting an extra object in the way of the conversation. Does this make sense? Okay, I promise you, when you have, when I free you, whatever authority vested in me and the power of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, I remove this burden on you that you feel like you have to prove and defend God's honor with everyone. You don't have to do that. Instead, you make compelling arguments as to why you believe and why it's logical and why it's reasonable. Does that make sense? God doesn't need you to be on some crusade to convince everyone of your theological position, which may change in the future anyways. All right. Here's the key question to ask. If the Gospels give an accurate historical record of Jesus, wouldn't that warrant taking them seriously? This is what you ask. All right, so you go through this conversation, you say, all right, now, if we agree that even if you want to say they aren't perfect or have embellishments or that the authors made mistakes about distances or locations or times or whatever, if these are historical, reliable, firsthand witness accounts about Jesus, shouldn't we then take them seriously? Shouldn't we investigate such a matter? The goal is not to say, well, there's no mistake, even though I believe that there are no errors. The goal is to say, do you think that this document is on par with other historical documents that are worth looking at? That's the goal. Okay. The key tactic or key, thing when discussing the Bible is number 2, never read a Bible verse in isolation. This is what happens all the time. And you're guilty of this, and I am too. You pull out some verse and you're like, gotcha. You got the verse. You got the verse and you read it and you almost you got your Bible, you read it, and you put it down, you're like, boom, game, set, match. Nailed it. Gotcha. Right? Okay. All you're doing is misusing the Bible. So you don't read a Bible verse in isolation. The skeptic, this is what the claim. Skeptics often pull Bible verses out of context to claim contradictions or moral flaws. All right, they'll pull a verse out. They'll read this thing. For instance, this is a great one. They'll say, well, Jesus said, don't judge. Do you know he said that? Do you know what Jesus did right after that? He judged. Did you know that? He said this, literally, the very next thing he says, now here's what I want. Okay, ready? Don't cast your pearls before swine. Here's what he's saying. Don't waste your time with people who are going to trample what we're talking about. And then he says specifically, like he talks about dogs, and he's comparing people to Jesus. Hey, there are you have to make judgment calls. Paul says this. Hey, don't judge the world. But then he says this. This is great. He says, aren't we supposed to judge those inside the family of God? It's like, aren't we supposed to judge the people that are in the church? Jesus said this. Do you know he said this? He said this. He said this. Ready? I know you don't like this, but here it comes. Ready? He said, a good tree produces good fruit, and a bad tree produces bad fruit, and good trees don't produce bad fruit, and bad trees don't produce good fruit. So, here's what he says. Ready? You should be a fruit inspector. You should be inspecting the fruit of people's life. That's a judgment. You're making a judgment call on people. So, it's really easy to pull a verse out and say, well, therefore, I'm right. Okay, that's not the goal. Context is key. If you don't know what an individual verse means, you can't simply read that one verse. Here's a great one that is totally gonna, I think we talked about this before. I apologize to mess you up. And if some of you have this tattooed, I really apologize, but here we go. There's a verse in the book of Jeremiah, chapter 29, verse 11. You know this? Jeremiah 29, 11. All right, anyone got it tattooed? Anyone? Okay, even if you do, you're like, don't look at me. I don't want to raise my. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans, right? To prosper you, not to harm you, to give you a hope in the future. Might be the greatest possible verse you could ever have for your life. Here's the problem. When you pull that verse out and then claim that over yourself, what you don't recognize or realize is the context in which that is written. It's written to people in exile who have been kidnapped and taken to another country, and God says, hey, listen, I have a plan for your future. Now, I'm looking around here, none of you have been kidnapped and held against, I'm assuming, none of you have been kidnapped and held against your will and are in captivity right now. None of you are living in Babylon in the Old Testament during the Old Testament conquest period. So when you pull out a verse and claim that over your life, what you're doing is you're potentially, possibly misunderstanding, misinterpreting what is actually going on in the verse. We do this too. Everyone does this, right? You pull out a verse and it's like some, magic bullet that's going to prove your point. The goal is not to pull out some verse. You have to read the larger context to understand the writer's meaning. This is why it's so important. I remember a pastor telling me this when I kind of was first, getting into church, and he said, don't ever just pull out one verse and then think you know what it means. And then he said this is great. He says, that is how cults start. You read a verse about holding snakes and you're like, that's it. Let's go to the reptile zone. It's time to worship the Lord. And you're like, I don't know if we doing this? We're doing this. And this is what he said. He goes, if anyone in like some random weird cult, all you have to do is read the context of the verse that your leader quotes, and it'll end your experience in the cult. You just got to read the context. Read the verses before and after. So if you want to find out the meaning, here's the deal. This practice is critical for you as a student of the Bible. This isn't like so that you can tell other people about like what the Bible says. This is for you. When you read and try to understand a passage or what's going on, you have to do this for yourself to understand what is going on in the Bible. It's also critical in dealing with objections about the Bible. That knowing like how the context, how the context changes a verse is essential for yourself and as you deal with objections that people have. To understand the meaning of a text, we need to be clear on the flow of thought of the passage. It's context. All right. How did it start? What is this verse saying? And then what does the writer write next with regard to what this means? The audience, you have to know the audience it was written for. Its historical, cultural settings, and purpose. If you read the book of Galatians, anyone read, Galatians, that's like your book? You're like, yeah, I love Galatians. Okay, Galatians is a short little book that Paul wrote. In its, few chapters, he talks about, he brings up a topic you're like, what is going on? He brings up circumcision and says it dozens of times. And you're like, Paul, this is a weird thing to focus on, to put in the Bible. If you don't know the target audience, then that doesn't make sense to you. You're like, what? This is weird. When you recognize and realize, oh, he's writing to a Jewish congregation who is making Jewish requirements over new Christians, that they have to become Jews to become a Christian, you see, oh, that's why he comes down hard on this. Because even though we're under grace now, they're trying to get people back under the law. And he's like, don't you dare go backwards. Galatians is about going back to religion instead of freedom from it. Oh, that changes things. You can only understand the context of what Paul is writing if you recognize and realize, oh, that's who he's writing to. That's why this is such a big deal. That's why it's in the Bible. So you also have to know the normal conventions of language of that audience, figures of speech, idioms, genre, all kinds of, there's all kinds of use of language in the Bible. Here's an example. Ready? This is one for us. 1,000 years from now, that maybe this idiom won't exist, but all right, here it is. Ready? Oh, did you hear that, that so-and-so kicked the bucket the other day? You're like, oh, you know what that means, right? Yeah. No? Oh, have we already gotten away from it? In 1,000 years, someone reads it and like, oh, that's weird. People just went around kicking buckets. Like, no. If you don't understand the context of our culture to know that that means someone passed away, then you read that and you're like, oh, well, back in America, 2025, remember, man, there's a few centuries where I guess everyone just had a bucket and they would just kick them. And because they talk about it. If you don't know what that means, then you're gonna totally misunderstand the language, right? Okay, this is no different in the Bible. You read an idiom, you read an expression, and you're like, oh, I can't believe that's in there. You're like, well, that's not what it means. That's not what you just read. You're taking it literally, but that is a figure of speech that you have to know and recognize and realize that's not actually literally what they were talking about. So this skill is critical for you because you'll have friends challenge you on passages of scripture that they completely misunderstand because they missed the context, or they were not aware of the cultural setting, or they did not observe and understand the normal conventions of language of that time. They get some of these wrong, and so they then bring up presumed errors or conflicts or contradictions in the Bible. Therefore, they've misunderstood the point that the author is making and have created or imagined problems that were not there. We're gonna go over a few examples here in just a minute. So this is what people do. They read a verse because they read it in English and they say, oh, I know what these English words mean. I know what this is saying. Therefore, I can't trust the Bible. Instead of recognizing and realizing, hey, there's some real work here to get to the meaning of some of these like expressions that we don't use anymore, but they certainly did. So instead, there's imagined issues or problems that can you believe the Bible? We'll look at some of the big ones here in just a second. So the key question to ask is this: are you reading the verse in context, or are you assigning your own meaning to it? Now, again, you do this. You do this. So as much as we want to say hey, you guys, you stop doing this. Stop assigning meaning to that verse. Listen, you open the Bible, you have a verse or a passage, and you do this. It's really easy to do. This is why when you are decide to I'm gonna really get serious about studying the Bible, okay, it takes some work. It takes some work because this document was written at the latest 2,000 years ago. All right, culture has changed in 2,000 years. So you have to go back in time almost and do some work to find out what was actually going on. Okay, here's the third thing. You want to address tough moral objections. Don't you dare run away from them. This is the hard part because this is the stuff that's scary. This is the stuff when someone brings up a question or a topic and you're like, oh boy, this is why I don't ever open my mouth in public because I don't know what to do. I don't know what to say, right? This is the stuff that you're like, I just would rather not talk about it. Okay, when you do that, ready for this? I'm gonna both discourage you and then hopefully by the end encourage you. Okay, ready? Let me first knock you down before we build you up, okay? When you do that, when you shy away from difficult topics, you admit defeat. and you subconsciously let people know we don't have good answers. This doesn't mean you have to know every single answer, but you should know some. It shouldn't be, I don't know anything about my faith. If you're serious about following Jesus, you should know some things. And for the things that people bring up that you don't know, there's no reason why you can't, ready for this? Study it for yourself. There's no reason you can't find an article or even get a book or read a chapter or pursue some sort of all right, what is the Christian response to this thing? One really great resource, okay, I'll give this to you. It's like cheating, but all right, here we go. It's like Cliff Notes for the Bible. Okay, there's a website called Got Questions. All right, you go to that. It's got, hundreds of questions about the Bible, and it's like an article about someone has a question about some random thing about the Bible. Awesome, here's a page about it that will give you that's a super quick general answer. Awesome, without feeling like I gotta go buy a book. No, you don't have to buy a book. You can, certainly, but you should at least have some sort of ability or working knowledge to pursue and find answers to tough questions. So don't shy away from them. It may mean in the moment you go I actually don't know, but tell you what, let me go look into it, and then can we talk about it later? That is a much better response than, I don't know, I just believe it. Why do you believe it? Stop asking me questions. A much better response is, that's an interesting thought, and I haven't really looked. Let's do this. Let me look into it, and then I would love to talk to you about it later. Okay, you took it seriously. Awesome. Okay, first, the conquest of Canaan, understanding the context. Here's the claim. God commanded genocide and ethnic cleansing in the Old Testament. Anyone ever been asked this or told this? The Bible, God is a God of, he's a genocidal maniac. This is a lot of what are often referred to as the New Atheists or the New Atheist movement who write books talk about God in this way. So they'll have complete chapters about this, and you can look up, find the quotes, and for them, they'll point to this and say, this is the reason we can't believe in the God of the Bible, because how dare he command the Israelites to wipe out entire nations? It's genocide. How can a good God command genocide? Someone brings that up to you and you're like, oh boy, I didn't think I was ready for it. I know I'm not ready for it. Like this, how in the world do you respond to that, right? Here we go. First, you have to understand the language that's used, or the figures of speech, they used what's referred to as military hyperbole. Near Eastern military language used hyperbole. Hyperbole is we can say this, is the cultures use exaggerated language in battle reports, such as this language, utterly destroy. You read that and you say, wow, literally this means to completely annihilate every living, breathing thing. How could God command that? Simply put, the hyperbolic language of utterly destroy meant to thoroughly defeat, not to completely annihilate. Let me give you an example, okay? I'm a basketball coach. Our season just ended, so it's over, but we won some games and we lost some games. There's something that happens when you win by a lot or you lose by a lot. The language you use is not, hey, we beat them by a good number of points. You say things like this, oh, we destroyed them. How could you do that? Those are children of a mother who what do you mean you destroyed them? We killed them, Dad, we killed them. You killed the people? Why would you kill that? This is basketball. And you're like, well, you know that's not what it means. Right? Or this, Dad, they were real good. We got annihilated. They creamed us. And you're like, are you the only one to survive and tell me this? Like everyone else got destroyed? You know that's not what they mean. Okay, in ancient Near East cultures, they would use this language and say utterly destroy. Utterly destroy meant to, all right, they have been defeated and it's decisive. It does not mean We killed every last person. So you'll see things in the Bible where it says like God commands them to utterly destroy. And here's what he means. Ready? You're going to war and you're going to defeat them. And it will be decisive. Here's some proof from the scripture. Ready? Joshua 10:40 says Israel wiped them out. We have the same language. Oh, we wiped them out. We destroyed them. Yet later passages show the Canaanites still living there. Oh wait, did you wipe them out or not? Well, no. It's a figure of speech. We defeated them, but we didn't kill all of them. We just utterly defeated their army and their military, and it's over. We wiped them out. But they're still families. Like, there's still people who are allowed to live. Joshua completely destroyed the Canaanites. Yet we see this. Survivors appear later. They're still, so completely destroy doesn't mean what we think it means. Completely destroy every last one of them. The goal was military defeat and expulsion, not ethnic cleansing. When you talk about, read this language, this is not like God getting on some ethnic cleansing like tirade where he's like, all right, just kill them all. If they're alive, all right, get rid of them. Here's what else we see. Ready? There is a level of moral depravity that existed here during this time that was different. Canaanites were guilty of extreme moral corruption, including, this is terrible, child sacrifice, temple prostitution, widespread violence, and murder. This was just the way of life. All right. If you have a culture or a society that lives and carries out these things, and not just like randomly, but I mean, they practice child sacrifice as a means of worship. All right, we're gonna do this. An untold number of lives that were ended because of this. All right. How long does a good and just God allow that to continue? How long does he allow victims to continue to be killed? He gave the Canaanites 400 years to repent. All right, hey, listen, you have time. You have time. I'm gonna give you time. Okay, you gotta stop this. You gotta stop this. Generation after generation after generation after generation. And then eventually he says, all right, that's enough. Israel, you have to go wipe them out. They're not changing. They won't change. This will continue until they are ready, utterly destroyed. Not kill every last one of them, but this culture has to end. When the Israelites committed the same sins, you know what God did? He judged them too. He is a morally consistent. He's an equal opportunist. Hey, if you're gonna do this, you're gonna be punished and judged too. If you're going to destroy and harm the innocent in the same way, I can't allow that to continue. So we can see this. Canaanites, they practiced extreme depravity, child sacrifice, and this conquest was divine judgment for centuries of wickedness, not racial extermination. This is what people will say, like, God, this is genocide. No. This was finally saying, enough is enough, Israel, you have to go end the culture that puts this to practice. And here's the thing, ready? Because Israel didn't destroy them completely. It didn't like when we think of like wipe them all out. The same tendencies of this culture creeped into Old Testament Israel, which is why they started doing the same thing. They started worshiping the same gods as the Canaanites, and they started Israel, God's people started human sacrifices. So God has to wait. He has to. All right. This is too terrible. I'm gonna have to end your experience and your culture as well. I have to change this. And so Israel was allowed to be conquered and sent in exile. This is where we get the books of like Daniel and like his contemporaries, because Daniel is kidnapped. He's taken as an exile into Babylon, and that's where we get the book of Daniel. It's in response to God saying enough is enough. And so Israel itself then gets judged for the same wickedness. Even Israelites later received the same punishment when they adopted these practices. And it ended eventually in the Babylonian exile, where they were conquered, where Jerusalem was overrun, and they were all taken back to Babylon. All right, has this ever been brought up to you? Slavery in the Bible. The claim, here it is, ready? The Bible condones slavery. Someone brings this up, and again, you believe in the Bible? Yeah. Man, so I've had someone say this to me. So how many slaves do you have? I'm like, oh, that's cute. One more soon enough, sir. I didn't say that, but that's what I think. I don't say that in the conversation. But someone goes, I've had a guy, how many slaves do you have? And I'm like, man, okay, all right, here we go. Well, you're a Christian, right? So the Bible condones slavery. All right, let's talk about it. Okay, does the Bible condone slavery? Right? You want to say no, but in this moment you're going, I don't know. Does it? Does it not? I remember being at a church, the first church we were at, I served as first volunteered and then intern and then became a director and then eventually a pastor over the youth group, and it was like awesome. And I remember that church having a business meeting that went sideways, and it was the worst meeting I've ever been at. It was an open mic, and it was anyone can just share and say whatever they want, and it went on for hours. And it's like, this is terrible. You people are terrible. And not you, but like in general, like, I mean, it was just weird stuff that I don't even like want to share. But I remember one particular person got up because one guy said, hey, we need to guys, I know we're upset and we're angry. It was a fight over like the direction of the church, and eventually a church split. And it was like, hey, we need to focus on what the Bible tells us. And then another lady gets up and says, hey, I've got a degree from Bible college. And listen, the Bible condones slavery. So we need to be careful how much we listen to the Bible. And I'm like, this is the church. What are you taught? What is going on right now, right? You see people in the audience like, oh, slavery? Oh, I don't know that. Like, I don't think you guys have ever opened the Bible. And yet, here it is. So, does the Bible condone slavery? How we think of slavery. All right, the Hebrew word is abed for slave. It means both slave and servant, but most cases describe, ready, indentured servant. This is a little different. The Greek word is doulos, is often translated bond slave, a slave in bondage, but it's also the word that Paul uses for himself, that he is a doulos for Christ, a bond slave, like someone who is, I am now under the mastery and have chosen to give myself. Okay, all right, so let's talk about these words. Some key protections first in the Mosaic law, the Old Testament law with regard to when we say the word slavery. First, kidnapping for slavery was punishable by death. This was not something that was promoted. This was explicitly said, if you do this, it is a capital punishment. This is death penalty. If you kidnap someone to be there, to have them as a slave, death penalty. That doesn't sound like condoning slavery. Servants or ebeds or indentured servants had rights. They had rest days, they had legal rights, and they had freedom after 6 years. So if you say, like, here's how it works. Here's an indentured servant. I owe an amount that I can't pay back. All right, I will give myself in servitude to you to work it off. I will pay it off because I can't afford it. You are an ebed. And people will translate a slave. That is very different. That is very different than obviously America has a history with slavery, and we have a notion that when we hear the word slave, we immediately think to like our experience of slavery, but that is not the same as what we're talking about in the Old Testament. Runaway slaves were protected, not returned to owners. So even if there certainly were slaves in the same sense, like certain nations would conquer other nations, and then they would say like, all right, you are now ours. Right? So it wasn't all like a willingness to say, oh, I'll serve you. There were people who were against their will put into servitude and were captured. All right, now, if they ran away, Israel was told, hey, don't return them back. That doesn't sound like the same experience of slavery in America. This was nothing like the race-based slavery that we had in America, where all of these things were, the opposite was true. So when we talk about slavery in the Bible, it's the same word, but again, it means something totally different. It's a different context. The New Testament context, we could talk a lot about this. Paul in Philemon, this book written about a slave, about a doulos, to treat Onesimus no longer as a slave, but as a beloved brother. Hey, listen, there's this guy. All right, he was a doulos. Don't treat him like that anymore. He's now a brother. Huh. It doesn't sound like Paul is condoning or approving slavery in the sense that we think of slavery. Here's what we see too, even in our own history. Christians like William Wilberforce fought against slavery, and you know what they did? He did so using biblical principles. He says, I read my Bible, and slavery, like American slavery, is incompatible with following Jesus. So I'm gonna devote my life to ending slavery. Not because it was, the moral fight of the day that people were like, you know what we should do? We should end slavery. People didn't, that was not an option. Ending slavery, that's our workforce. And he says, no, as a Christian, we cannot allow this. We cannot allow this. And it's his faith, it's like his belief in the scriptures that gives him this internal motivation to say, we have to end this. This is horrific. This has to stop. So we can say this. The Bible regulated and humanized servanthood in contrast with the brutal practices of surrounding nations. I don't know if, maybe you know this, maybe not. Do you know that every culture in history practiced slavery? All of them. This is a worldwide phenomenon. And the first to really abolish it, the first to say like, hey, we're going to start a worldwide effort to end this was America. As much as listen, our history is of course full of reprehensible things. And yet we have people who stand up and say, I will sacrifice my life to end this thing in slavery. We'll end it in America and it will spread. And the people who did it did so because of their Christian convictions. That's different than what we think of, like the Bible condoning this. No. True followers of Jesus who understand God and his word look at this and say, this cannot be. Slaves in Israel had rights and protections, unlike the harsh slavery seen in later history. Okay, next section. We see this. Morality in the Bible is not for today. The Bible's moral influence on society. Here's what people will say. The Bible is outdated and promotes oppression. You ever heard this? Anyone ever heard this? No? None of you? Okay, all right. This is the common one that people will bring up, like, the morality of the Bible that we find in the scriptures is not what mine is. It's way worse, and so why would I go back to that book? So the Bible's moral influence on society. The Bible inspired, like we just talked about, the abolition of slavery. It inspired equal human rights, this movement of equal human rights, and it inspired the social justice movement. Okay. All of these come about because of Scripture, the morality that we find in the text of Scripture. The abolition of slavery, William Wilberforce, the abolitionist, used biblical principles to end slavery. Martin Luther King Jr., he used biblical principles to fight injustice. MLK is, probably the most well-known figure in this movement, in the civil rights movement, and he did so from, you guessed it, his Christian convictions and his understanding of the Bible. We see this, women's rights, and this idea that all men are created equal. Jesus, I don't even know this, Jesus elevated women's status, and the early church empowered women. This is, N.T. Wright is famous for making this argument about how we can trust the reliability of the witnesses of the resurrection because they were women. That's what he says. Yep, I see a lot of the ladies are like, that's right. First of all, the odds of you getting the details to far greater than us, right? I don't know the stat, but I do know this, that women statistically know and speak more words than men. Translation, we are a little dumber. We are. And here's the thing, no, we don't want to admit, we know it. We know it. Here's the thing, ready? Women had no legal status in the first century during Jesus' time. They could not be a witness in a court. The testimony wouldn't be accepted. Couldn't own property unless you were attached to a man. They had no status. There was no reason for them to be believed. And yet we're told it was women who got to see the resurrected Jesus first. It's women who Jesus says, hey, go back and tell the rest of the guys, right? Tell them what you saw. And when they get there, this is crazy. They don't get to see Jesus. The ladies did. Jesus is like, hey, all right, ladies. It's the ladies at the cross who stayed. Well, the guys ran and hid, right? Save John, right? John, one good guy, and then we see that like there's various Marys there, and like they're all there. It's the ladies who are coming back to visit Jesus to take care of his body, not the guys. We see that in the Gospels, if this is a made up thing, this is N.T. writes his argument. If this were made up, if guys wrote this later, they wouldn't write women as the heroes. They would put themselves as the heroes. Instead, what we see is Peter denied Jesus 3 times. That's in there. And they wrote it, and they're like, this is what happened. The women are the heroes, and the guys are the villains. That is so countercultural. Man, that must be accurate to what actually happened. We see this, that this idea of equal human rights, this idea that everyone has equal human rights, that is a biblical value. That is not a cultural value. Throughout history, in every culture, there was no equality. You had the royal class, and you had all of us losers. And they got to decide what happens and keep the power all the time. And then the Bible comes about, and people start believing it and actually like living it out. And societies begin to change. And this idea of innate human worth shows up because, ready for this? Because we were made in the image of God, every single one of us. That's a different thought. That's new. And because everyone was made in the image of God, ready for this? Your worth and value is the same as mine. Is the same as some dictator, is the same as some president or ruler or governor or business owner. And all right, I have the same inherent, and so this idea of fighting for equal human rights, that is a biblical value. Certainly not one coming about from society. The care for the poor, I don't know if you know this, biblical teaching led to the development of hospitals, orphanages, and charities. Do you know that the first hospitals were started and created by Christians? The church, Christians, started hospitals. Christians started orphanages. All of these things that we think of like, oh man, like caring for those in need, and that all comes from people's, the Christian conviction found in the scriptures. Huh. As much as it's like you want to divide the two and say like, oh well, we want to be like society. We're a good society, and we love people, and we don't need Jesus to tell us how to love people. Of course, that's true. The issue here is the history of the world shows us that without Christianity, we live in a different culture. Society is very different than what it looks like today, and it's very worse. It is. There's a book written, I think Frank Turek is the author, and he wrote a book. It's not too old now, maybe a few years, and it's called Stealing from God. It's a great title, and it's a great book. It's called Stealing from God, Why Atheists Need God to Make Their Arguments. And he goes through each category and says, if you take God out, you can't do science. If you take God out, you lose morality. If you remove God from the equation, like every one of these issues that would claim to be either non-religious or critical, man, you sure need the foundations that were set forth from the Christian worldview simply to make this argument, right? And one of them is morality, but also social justice and equal rights, like equal human rights. You remove God, there's no reason to believe that all of us are equal. Instead, what we have, ready for this, is the animal kingdom. And it's survival of the fittest. It's the strongest gets all the ladies, right? Until he gets old, and then the young buck removes him from the throne, and all of a sudden, sorry, dude, we gotta go for the new guy, and he gets all the ladies, right? Some of you, I might have just explained your dating life, and I apologize. Yet we don't do that. Of course we don't do that. Why are we different? There is no equality in the animal kingdom. Yet for us, I mean, this is like what we fight for. Modern justice movements, MLK Jr., the civil rights leaders, grounded their activism in biblical justice. Okay, so the key question to ask, if you reject the Bible's morality, what standard do you use to determine right and wrong? I've asked this before to people as well. If the Bible is bad, what are you comparing it to? What's the good that's better than it? And the best we have, ready? The best we come up with is some sort of internal moral compass. That's the best we got. Internal moral compass decided by and voted in and agreed upon by society. All right. But if someone's moral compass is off, if someone's moral compass is different in such a way that they do some things that we would say this is wrong, evil, this is criminal, what right do we have to judge them, to punish them, to say they're wrong? There's some sort of what seems to be some sort of greater like moral understanding that we all know, but many are uncomfortable acknowledging. People will say things like this, well, as long as you just don't harm someone else. All right, why is that the case? That sense of moral, like internal moral compass, again, that doesn't exist in other species. Where does that come from? Do no harm. Where does that come from? If you have like any amount of animals, I remember, you want another story? All right, well, here it comes, whether you like it or not. I remember growing up, we had a couple acres, and it was back to like a canal and some fields and stuff, so we had wildlife, and I didn't know any different, but it was, whatever. And so we would often, like in my mom's planters, there'd be like snakes and stuff, and so we'd go catch them, and it's like, I don't know how she did it because she was terrified of snakes, but it was like, oh, found another snake, and we found like a king snake one day and a garter snake the next day, and there would be, like possums, and we had coyotes, and the coyote, all right, I'll tell you, it's a total bummer. The coyote ate our neighbor's poodle. See, listen, that noise you just made, no other coyotes make that noise. They're like, good, that's dinner. I remember having two snakes, a king snake and a garter snake, and I'm like, all right, what's gonna happen? Put them in and just watch, like nothing happened. There's two in a tank, and I'm like sealed off this, all right. The next day, just one snake. It's one snake, that's it. Survival of the fittest. Whoa, that's different. There's no internal moral compass from kings. That's why they're called the king snake, right? So if we remove the Bible and the standard of like one person's right, another person, like we all have to, man, we don't see that. We don't see that in the animal kingdom. How come we have this sense of morality that doesn't exist elsewhere? You have to be able to explain that. If there's no God, if all this is just made up, where does that come from, right? So my final encouragement, okay, is this. You don't need all the answers. Just ask good questions. This is what we've been talking about, like, every time we do this, like to use questions to make a point, use questions to advance the conversation. And even if you don't have the answers, you can still ask questions and say like, hey, I don't know if I have the answer, but I'm curious to hear what you have to say. And then here's one of my favorite things. So like, here's the last one, so you have it. All right. The Bible, I don't know if you know this, has withstood 2,000 plus years of scrutiny. It can handle a few more. It can handle a few of your friends or the people you know being like, I can't believe this. Like, all right, there aren't questions in here that someone can ask and you go, oh my goodness, I close every church. They got us. They got us. Okay, so I want to give you also one last, this is a great thing to remember and to be able to think through, all right? Okay, someone bring up a topic or a question or a critique or a question about the Bible or be theology or historical or some sort of issue, okay? Any question, just raise your hand. Someone who's just brave and bold, ask the question and I'll repeat it, all right? So you're asking me maybe the toughest question you can think of, right? Something that's not a rhetorical question, something that is all right, how would you answer that? Why did God okay, give me one. Give me a good one. Doesn't the Bible teach the world that the world is square? The four corners of the earth? All right. And you want to know what I think about that? All right, okay, ready? Here it is, ready? I actually have a good answer, but I'm curious, how do you think I would answer it? What was that? Baloney? That I would say baloney. It's true, I don't know if I would use that word, baloney. But how would you square that away? They say well, the Bible says four corners. The earth is a sphere or flat. Anyone? Okay, good. How would you square that away? Square that away. Did you get that? That was pretty good. What was that? It's a figure of speech. Yeah, okay, listen. In real time, I gave you an answer without even answering it. I asked you to answer your own question, and you know what? You did. Listen, I can't over explain how incredible it is when you ask them to answer their own question. I'm telling you, and this isn't some gotcha thing. It's a hey, I'm having dinner with a guy, a buddy of mine, and we're gonna coach baseball together, and we get together about baseball, and I'm like, all right, great. And he knows I'm a pastor, he doesn't go to church, and somehow we get into conversations about faith and evolution and creation and the beginning of the world. And I'm like, all right, here we go. Awesome. All right, man, cool. We don't need to talk baseball strategy. Let's get into it. And he asked me, why did God create a world with so much terrible things in it, with so much pain and heartache? Why couldn't he make a place where we don't have to do all of this? We don't have all of these issues and struggles and people who are doing evil to each other. How can God you say is good? I'm assuming you say he's good. Yeah, I say he's good. How can he allow that? And he asked that and he's like, all right. I mean, he genuinely wants to know, but it's also all right, pastor, I gotcha. And you know what I did? I did what I just did. I said, well, I thought about that a lot. That's a big question. And the fact that you asked that means that you're thinking that's a deep question. So, hey, good on you. Most people aren't thinking like this. And before I answer though, I'm curious, how would you answer that? If you were me, what do you think would be the right answer? I don't know, so I'm asking you. No, but take a stab at it. What do you think? Honestly, what would be all right, how would that work? And he gave an answer that was as good as anything I could ever share. And he says, well, the only thing I can think of is that God wanted us to have free will, and because of that, some people choose the bad and not the good. And then there's consequences for the other people. I didn't know you were a Christian. You want to come to church? And I said, hey, dude, that's it. That's it. And that makes sense. I mean, maybe we don't like it or wish it wasn't true, but that's the answer I would give, to say, well, God created us freely to be able to think and decide things freely. And in doing so, he allows for the option of people to choose the not good. And throughout history, people have done that on a global scale. And here's the thing, man, this is what Christianity is. I've done that. I've chosen the not good. Call it sin, call it wrong, call it mistakes, call it whatever you want to call it. I've done that. I'm going to guess you're not perfect. You've done it. Oh man, yeah. And yet God so values our freedom that he lets us do that. So he creates a world, and by allowing that, in a number of instances, it gets out of hand, and innocent people deal with the consequences. But that's still, this is the worldview. It's still better than a world of robots. Still better that you and I have freedom, that we can have conversation right now and make decisions in a world that is still better than being compelled to do something against our will, not have free will. And he goes, makes a lot of sense. I don't know if I like everything about Christianity, but I could see that. I could see why you think that. Maybe I agree. Maybe I tend to agree. His biggest question he had for me, he says, actually, I actually agree. And then we move into the next topic. The goal is not, again, it's not like a gotcha, like anytime they ask a question, well, you answer first, right now, or else. No. Hey, I'm curious, what would you think? And there's been plenty of times where guys will share something and it's like totally off base, and I still give them, I'm like, hey dude, that's actually, I've never thought of it like that before. Like, that's an interesting way. Here's how I see it, and here's my take. And it's a conversation trying to pursue and find out which makes the most sense. Instead of, I'll give you the answer, and I'm right, and if you disagree, it's not gonna go well for you, right? Because I'm right and you're wrong. Your mentality should be, how do I portray Jesus in such a way that it gets people to think this is more reasonable than I maybe gave it credit before our conversation. This makes more sense than maybe I initially thought it did. And what you've done is allow them to take one step closer to seeing like the truth and the reality of Jesus. Instead of a fight right here, right now, I'm right, you're wrong, you say, hey man, let's just have these conversations. And I always try to end conversation by saying, hey, I really enjoyed this, and I really do. That's not true. There's been a few where I'm like, we're not doing this again. And for good reason. But most conversations, if you and I got in a conversation, I'm hoping it would go well. Most conversations I end, I say, hey, I would like to do this again if you're up for it. Like, I really enjoyed this and really enjoyed like talking to you about these things. We can do coffee or lunch. And I've never, maybe it's because of my role, I don't know, I doubt it, but I've never had someone go, actually, you're terrible. I hate you. This was the worst experience I've ever had. I don't want to do it again. I'm like, oh. People are interested and want to talk about this more than you think. The issue is not that people don't want to talk about spiritual things. The issue is we get so in our own heads and nervous and scared to have conversations about these. So let me challenge you. Again, the goal is not I'm right and they're wrong. The goal is I want them to be thinking about it. I want them to lay up in their bed at night and go, man, he said something that, gosh, I've never really thought about it before. Like, oh, that makes more sense than I'd like it to make. Like, all right. Okay, we have now enough of that, though it was good. I'll pray for us here in a second, but we have the reason you came was to find out who's going to Hawaii. And you want to know, how many of these baskets am I walking home with? That's what you want to know. Like, how many? All right. So, where's